So this is the first of my series called On the Ground. What I'm hoping to do is interview people around the world and get their reactions in terms of what's happening on the ground in their countries. I think that there is some value in talking to people who are living their lives, and especially some of the so-called hotspot countries, I guess, where of interest like India, Sweden, definitely the US, China, Singapore, Taiwan, to really just get an insight into everyday people's lives and how the pandemic is affecting them. I'm trying to stay away from highly political views. Not really interested in that. I think that's covered as much as it needs to be in the media. I'm more interested in just everyday people and their lives and how they feel the government's response is, what they feel like the contributing factors are in terms of transmissions and deaths, and just overall, see how people are feeling around the world. So this will be called the On the Ground series from Statecraft. I hope you enjoy it and learn from it. And I'll do a series of it. I've got someone in India lined up. I've got somebody in Pakistan, Sweden, a few people in the US lined up. So if you have other suggestions for people that you might know, that'd be great for guests in countries around the world. I'd love to hear from you. You can just email me or drop a comment and let me know who you think would be great. My first guest is Pathros Alex. He lives in Kerala, India, which is the southeastern tip of India, a beautiful place that's known for its tourism. And he's been living there. I met Pathros a few years ago. He worked with me at one of my companies. Very intelligent, well-informed individual. So I reached out to him to get a real understanding of what's happening in India in terms of, they're on their third lockdown now, so they've taken a different approach to lockdown, what's happening in terms of government and industry response, how the economy is doing, what are the cultural factors that might affect a place like India in terms of being able to keep its transmission, infection, and death rate so low. So we had a really great conversation, and it'll follow right after this. And hopefully you'll find some value in those insights. I definitely did in talking to Pathros. Pathros, really good to see you,
Hi.
my friend.
Hey, Najib. It's a pleasure.
Haven't seen you in many, many years, but we've kept in touch. I mean, every now and then you reach out and we get a little bit caught up, but I mean, I guess it takes a worldwide pandemic for us to reach out and actually see each other.
Yeah, definitely. Now we have some personal time to catch up as
well. Thanks for agreeing to talk with me. I really wanted to, reach out to people in different areas of the world and see what's the actual situation on the ground for everyday people. I know with your background in the tourism industry, I'm really curious what's happening in India.
Definitely.
India is one of the places in the world that everybody's looking at because of the population density. And, I think the expectations were that the coronavirus was going to hit a lot worse in places like South Asia and it's not, right? And I want to explore that with you as well. But first, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background and how you ended up back in India and all that stuff?
All right. So my name is Pathros Alex. I am from a southern state in India called Kerala. It's all the way on the tip of India. So if you look at a map, if you just look at the bottom, it's right near Sri Lanka, if you had to compare another country. And I'm working as a director for a real estate and hospitality development firm. And I've been working here for about 3 years. And before this, I was working with Najib at Olive Partners on several management consulting projects. I've learned a ton of branding work from Najib. He's definitely the guru on that. So I definitely have kept all of those learnings in mind. And right now, we at my firm, we specialize in the tourism field. We have a boutique beach property. We have a seaside restaurant, and we also have a Ayurvedic and yoga wellness ashram. And just as Najib, you've mentioned, as we're all in the same boat at this point, we're all going through difficult things at home, at work, and it's definitely a worldwide thing that we're all experiencing. And hopefully we can all come much stronger. But I think just from my perspective, also is just taking each day as it comes and going from there in the grand scale of things. I think there are many different approaches, but that's definitely my philosophy.
And Kerala is interesting. As you said, it's in the southwestern tip of India, close to Sri Lanka, and it's, known for its tourism industry and its beauty. And,
Yeah,
I'm still waiting for you to invite me to come down and see it, which, I definitely want
there's always an open invitation. I told you that a long time ago.
But you might be coming back over here, right? Because you applied to a bunch of grad schools.
Yeah, I have, but again, it kind of depends on what's going on in the long term, right? So we don't really know if things would be normal or in terms of classes or courses. So we'll see. According to that, I mean, I think everybody's also kind of in a limbo, right? So they don't really know what a few months from now kind of looks like. So I think until I get a clear picture on that, then I can plan accordingly. Because I can't even board a flight right now. So
no, yeah, you're right. I mean, everybody, even here in Canada, in terms of students, and they don't know what's happening. We don't know what's happening week to week. Never mind what might happen in the fall in terms of returning to classes. We have started a bit of reopening of the province here. Anyway, there's a plan to reopen in the next couple of weeks and start easing restrictions. But it's to be seen how that goes. But in India, I think they've added, right, and they've added a couple of weeks to the lockdown. Is that right?
Yeah. So you've had this is the third lockdown. So the first lockdown was for 21 days. The second lockdown was for about 19 days. And now this lockdown's for about 14 days. So right now we're in the third lockdown.
So they're using a bit of a different approach, because here in the West, they don't really give us a time limit in terms of how long the lockdown will be. It's sort of, I mean, now we do have a staged reopenings, a relaunch, they call it. But that's interesting. So they actually gave you guys dates, in terms of how long the lockdown might last, but now we're into the third lockdown.
Yeah, that's the lockdown 3.0. That's what they're calling here, and it's a lot to do with the people, right? So in terms of the population size, the working force, and you have a lot of the manufacturing labor workers. So there's a lot of different pieces that go into this developing country's economy, right? So the grand scale of things, if you don't give people a timeline, they're gonna get impatient and rebel to a certain extent. So it's in terms of dealing with the Indian landscape and the health part of it firstly, and then the economy side of it. So balancing all these different social groups and the people from different categories is really important. So I think that's why they've split it up into time limits, so people have more of a tangible idea on how long this is going to last, while the truth maybe is that it might go on longer than nobody really knows. But having that sense of tangible timeline at least gives people some hope, I believe.
Actually, that's really interesting, right? Because, a lot of the media in the West is all about, how India and China can really crack down on their people because they're authoritarian regimes, and people just fall into line. That's why they were able to lock down, so easily. And I just laugh at that, because having been on the ground and in Asia, and in Pakistan, which is like 200 million people, I chuckle when people think that it's so easy to lock down population densities like they are in that region. So I know there was some criticism about how quickly the prime minister in India did the first lockdown. It was virtually overnight, and left a large migrant population with no means of getting back home. Created some cluster cases because people were not prepared for it, and there were still a lot of religious ceremonies and things going on, so it causes clusters. Which obviously with population density, the kind that India has, with 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, that's going to happen. So, what was the outcome of that? The first lockdown. What did you see or hear from people?
Yeah, so the first lockdown happened on a Monday, and the day before the lockdown, the prime minister announced a curfew. So it was kind of a foreshadowing of what was going to come. So people knew about the curfew. So once on the Sunday before the lockdown, the Prime Minister, he shut down everything virtually, like no trains, no flights, and people who are maybe transiting back home also, maybe they were stuck in transit in the middle of the country, or they might have been stuck in their workplaces, right? So their workplaces might be in in the south of India, and they might be from a northern state.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of migrant laborers, as you mentioned, who come all the way, especially in Kerala. So we have a lot of people who come from the western states of India, or even the northern states of India. They come all the way down south for jobs in hospitality, construction, IT. All industries have migrant workers, and when the curfew hit, people, I think, were definitely surprised on the Monday following when the whole country was shut down. So at that point, you can't go home, right? You can't. You have to be in the limits of your rented space or your the accommodation that your company provides, right? So a lot of people are stuck where in their workplaces or the cities that they don't even belong to. I think that's the toughest part for a lot of these people that unfortunately were on the bad end of this sudden lockdown, right? And
Yeah, no, I heard that there's somewhere like 100 million migrant workers in India, right? And I think it's important to give people a context of a place like India, that how diverse it is. Because I mean, I think generally sometimes the feeling is that places in Asia, because we're all majority brown skinned, that they're very homogenous, right? Which isn't the case at all. I mean, India, like 50 languages, I think, or something like that, or maybe even more, and all the religions of the world in India, and all the faiths, and all types of people of all diversity from north to south. So I don't think that sometimes in the West we truly grasp how diverse an area India is. So how's that affecting everything in terms of? I mean, the nice thing about Kerala, from what I've read, is that it's a highly educated population. What's the population? About 35 million or so.
Roughly.
Right. So I mean, that's the population of Canada, right? So we've got the population of Canada in one province in India, but you have
it's very dense.
Very
also, dense. Kerala is very dense.
Yeah.
So everything's close together. People are moving. You feel congested. You feel the people.
When I was first in Pakistan, right, like I got really irritated because it's like the humanity, right? People are right up against each other in lineups,
exactly.
And then there's no recognition of personal space because of the density. We go to parks and open areas, and it's just like there's no place to sit, right? If you want to sit, you basically sat right next to another family, right? Not like in Canada where the closest family could be meters away from you. That doesn't exist in places with that kind of density, and it takes getting used to, right? As people are there's no such thing as personal space really when you're out in public.
No.
And I don't think that people truly appreciate, when they talk about, how it must be because it's so easy to lock down the country. People just don't understand that when countries are that dense, how incredibly difficult it is. Now, so one of the theories and why, okay, so actually, let's give people some context in terms of what's happening in India with the coronavirus. So, India has less than 40,000 cases and around 1,100 deaths. I think they've just hit about 1,100 deaths. So, in comparison, the U.S. has over 1 million cases. I think 1.1 or even more than that, and over 60,000 deaths, right? And nowhere near the population of India. So some of the theories are, obviously the quick lockdown and early lockdown that India was able to do, and especially on travel restriction, because obviously stage 1 transmission is travel. So that might explain some of it, some of the low cases there. The other theory is that, so here's the two things that we keep hearing about of countries where the cases are so low and the death rate is so low. One is testing, right? Oh, India has one of the lowest testing rates in the world, which is true, right? And I mean, again, that also has to do with a far-flung and dense population, right? But India's testing rates are very low. But you know what? Even in that, then you should be able to project some sort of percentage, right? Like, okay, so if you're testing, 100,000 people, what percentage of that is actually showing up as being infected? And India's is very low. India's, infection rate out of the testing is only like 4%, and the
Yeah.
US is close to 20%, right? So
The recovery rate is really high here also, which is another surprising stat compared to the other countries that are going through the same situation. I think
the
roughly
recovery rate,
40,000
really?
infected.
Hmm.
Yeah, around 20,000 and a bit, and some change more than that have already recovered from the virus as well.
Yeah, see, so like, these things are very interesting, right? Because I keep telling people that it's not just about the ability to lock down so quickly. I mean, I think early lockdown is a big reason why a lot of these kinds are successful, because I think that, the preparedness in places like South Asia is a much higher. If anything that has to do with quick response is because, places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all of these regions, we have some sort of major disaster every year. You know what I mean? So the
Yeah.
ability for people to react and the preparedness is just at another level. I think that has to do with it. I think people, even on a personal level, are prepared to react to things that affect, a large part of the population or even the entire country.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really interesting because even from where I'm from, the state that I'm from, Kerala. So starting out in mid-March, we were the state with the most number of cases. So about maybe 10 to 15 cases. We were the number one in terms of coronavirus cases in India. And now if you look at the list of infections, we've dropped down almost till maybe in number 15. So we have 29 states. We're on maybe 15, 12 like that. So again, this has been the case because the previous years we had another virus here called the Nipah virus, which is another virus that was transmitted from bats. So the coronavirus theory also is that it was transmitted from bats. So in our state, we've been fortunate to have that initial systems and SOPs and also that medical infrastructure in place for this Nipah virus, which happened about 2 years ago. And so the same systems and procedures have been able to be implemented in this situation also. So, and that's one of the reasons that we've been able to drop down in that grand scheme of number of cases compared to the rest of the country as well.
That's really interesting, because obviously the projections were that India, because of its, poor health system and density, would be, very affected. There would be millions of cases and millions of deaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
But and this is what I keep arguing with people as well. I think that people underestimate how well prepared countries that have to deal with something constantly are for these kinds of situations. Versus in the West, the last time we had a case like this was over 10 years ago, right? And 2008, 2009, right? So, we're much less, and I think that there's forced learning there in places like India, where you just have to always be prepared for the next thing, and be able to quickly react to them. And it's not so much of whether or not it's an authoritarian regime. It's just like that quick response time that the population has in order to react to these kinds of national instances.
Yeah, I definitely in a situation like this. So if it's India, if it's Bangladesh, if it's Pakistan, or if it's Sri Lanka, any of these South Asian countries, when you implement something, people don't respond to soft measures, right? So people only respond when things are really in your face and when people are very aggressive about it. And that's again, it's a cultural motivation or cultural learning that it's been going on for a long time. And I think that's the biggest difference between say a country like Canada, where if the prime minister requests and in a soft way or to its citizens to, oh, please, guys, stay indoors, it's more likely to work. Whereas if the Prime Minister Modi does that here, I'm quite certain that nothing would happen and people will be still running around.
You're absolutely right, and that's a really good insight, Pathros, is that it's a very cultural thing. What we perceive in the West to be, very hard stance, or, the word everybody keeps using is authoritarian stances, and how we deal with these kinds of epidemics out in other parts of the world. it is a different cultural thing. You're absolutely right. Like, it also, I mean, it has a lot to do with things like education and literacy rate and cultural cues as well. The literacy rate in Kerala is quite high, though. Do you think that has to do with something to do with how you guys were able to go from the highest cases, transmitted cases, to lower, just the ability to communicate with people and make them understand?
Yeah, so the literacy rate was one of them, but also the infrastructure. So we have a very good health infrastructure here. So the state is divided into city limits and village areas. So in the city limits, we have government-run hospitals, and even in the villages, they have these public health clinics. So right from the top to the bottom, they're able to uh, um, administer some form of medical service. The Obviously the infrastructure, the scale of the infrastructure in a clinic and a hospital is completely different, but having that fluidity from the city limits to the villages, that really helps a lot. And that's something that's I'm not sure is known to a lot of people, and that is one of the reasons also that we've been able to respond a lot better to the virus. And also, yeah, as you mentioned, communication and just being able to understand, okay, what are the primary ways somebody would contract the virus, okay, and what are the measures that we could adopt to make sure that we don't contract the virus or our family members don't contract the virus, and what measures can we take in terms of quarantining and staying away from our loved ones if we have any symptoms, or even from crowds and such.
Do you think it's because, you have that tourism infrastructure as well, so you're already geared towards taking care of foreigners and guests, so you have this, infrastructure? Because I mean, I know, in Pakistan, a lot of the places, they're not set up uh, for outsiders, right? In terms of just
Mm.
access to facilities, cleanliness, um, even safety, right? But a place like Kerala, because of the tourism industry, maybe you already have that infrastructure in place, so it wasn't as difficult to put in the measures that needed to be put in, the health and safety measures that need to be put in.
Yeah, definitely. That also plays a factor in terms of. Just to give you some insight, so people who visit India, they would typically come to the south, or they would go to the north and the east or the west sides, and they might visit central India also. So they might go on a, say, if somebody comes for 3 weeks, they might start in uh, the northern parts of India, all the way to Delhi, which is the capital, to the west, which is Rajasthan, Gujarat. They might come down to Mumbai, central India. Then they'll probably come down to Kerala, which is the southern side of the country. And yeah, when you look in terms of the flow of people, so if you're in terms of infrastructure, basic infrastructure also, so the places where you have more people, firstly, and also more tourism, is going to be a lot more developed than the rest of the country, right? So yeah, these hubs would be more geared towards handling um, any crisis. So we've, even in Kerala, we've had before that Nipah virus that I mentioned, we had floods here also. So again, this is disaster management kind of built into the procedure, and you don't really expect it, but it's over the past few years it's been recurring, and this is the result of our use and our misuse of nature, right? So kind of our state has managed to tackle these issues, and tourism has definitely also played a part in that, because since we have more people coming into the country, we have more people visiting these places, the government does pay attention to that. So they have basic infrastructure. So is there a place where tourists can go and buy something, maybe a medical shop? Can a tourist go and go to a small shop where they can buy some water, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there room and board? Is there a local office for some complaints, or police station, right? So all these elements would be built around how many people will flow, and how many of these foreign visitors also would flow. So it definitely also plays a important part.
So then here's an interesting question, or maybe you've already answered it, is because Kerala is such a travel destination, and the first stage of transmission is through travel. Is that why that initially Kerala had such huge high numbers in terms of infection rates and then dropped off later? Or, I don't, was it high season at the time, or I would think it's still low season, right? If in March, or,
Yeah.
how much did travel play in with Kerala being such a high incidence area first, and then petering out?
Right. So there's two parts to that. So in Kerala, we have a lot of expats. So a lot of people from Kerala who work and live abroad. And they maybe out of 365 days of the year, they're outside of the country for maybe 200 plus days, right? And then they'll come back. So transmission can be, there's a lot of people who have Indians or people from Kerala who have gotten the disease are non-residents. So they're coming back from maybe the UAE, or they're coming back from the US, they're coming back from the Middle East, different places in Europe. So you have that's one side of the population that has brought back the virus. And then the second one would be the foreigners who are traveling from Europe, or who are traveling from transiting in Dubai, or transiting in different destinations to reach Kerala. Right, so you have those two parts. You have the people of Kerala who are working outside and coming back, and then also the visitors who are coming and coming for tourism.
Right. Okay. So I think you're saying we could attribute that part of it as to why Kerala would have been high at the beginning, because of that incidence of people coming back, expats coming back, and visitors coming into the province.
Yeah, definitely. And another interesting fact is that actually one of the first cases in the country also was in Kerala. So two students contracted the disease, and they were based out of Wuhan, so kind of the epicenter of this whole virus. And they came back end of January. So the government flew them back from China to Kerala, and they were in quarantine, and they were cured by end of February. About a month, 30 days later, they were cured. So again, initially going up for the first few cases, and now dropping off. Now we have about 500 cases, less than 500 cases, whereas the rest of the country, states like Maharashtra, Delhi, and surrounding parts of Delhi have almost 2,000 plus cases.
Interesting. What about, so there's a couple of things. One, it's not proven yet, and there's not a lot of evidence to say that the warm weather has kills off the virus. But I mean, I still think that's something that people might be considering as well. That some of these countries, I mean, because I would think for you as well, the weather's already during the daytime over 30 degrees Celsius, right? And the warm weather's been around for a while. So do you think, or what's the feeling on the ground there? Is the warm weather having an effect of keeping the transmissions and the cases low? Or, again, there's no scientific or medical proof that that's the case, but what are the medical officials saying on the ground in India about that?
Yeah, I think in the beginning there was a lot of speculation about that, especially in the media, and even the health minister here was talking about that. I think they've slowly moved away from that being a theory, because again, there is not much of a scientific background, and a lot of the knowledge on the virus is still unknown, right? So people, in terms of symptoms, also there's a few new symptoms that are coming up. I read an article about some people who have contracted the virus that have some inflammation in their toes, like frostbite, who contracted the virus. So again, there's a lot of things that we still don't know about the virus. So I think it was definitely, the weather was definitely one of the things that was talked about a lot, especially in India in the beginning, kind of to play down the situation and make people less panicky. Also I think that's one of the factors also is doing the rounds in terms of media. And now, if you would ask, say, if we would ask the health minister what they think about it, I think they would definitely shy away from using that as one of the reasons. And there might be some scientific evidence that says, yes, warm weather does in fact help, but I think we're still very far from actually knowing everything about the virus to be 100% about that.
Okay, so let's turn to another theory then, age. So, India is one of the youngest populations in the world. Median age is, I think, 28 or so versus, in the US, it's 38. So they're saying that, maybe that's the cause of it because of a younger population. They're able to fight it off better. They're able to recover quickly. Any weight to that theory at all on the ground in India? What are people saying in terms of the fact that having a young population may also be helping to control the transmission and the spread?
Yeah, definitely that applies to all the South Asian countries. So if you look at even Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the population kind of has the same demographics in terms of age, and a lot of the stats, if you look at it, shows that younger people do in fact get the virus, but they don't show symptoms. So in terms of having serious illnesses, they might not present as being positive with the virus, right? So what happens if you have, especially in India and South Asian countries, we have a big family. So if you have a family of 6 people, right, from the youngest person to the oldest person in the house, right? So the youngest person might not present any symptoms. They'll be okay. But if once they go home and they have day-to-day interactions with the elders, typically grandparents and such live at home, it's a family nucleus. Everyone lives together, right? So the young person who isn't showing any symptoms or who isn't very sick can very quickly or potentially pass it on to a more senior member of the family who could be severely impacted by that because they already have maybe some other illnesses, right? So diabetes, or they have maybe some Alzheimer's, or they have other issues with themselves also. So again, I think the age definitely helps, but in terms of the how the families and how society is kind of works in India. So even if the young people get it and they're okay, but then you have to look at the whole family, right? So if they might be okay, but the older members in the family could potentially, it can be fatal for them.
Yeah,
And
you're right.
young people also, yeah.
Yeah, you're saying, yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a double-edged sword, right? You have a young population that can fight it off, but then also so many households are multi-generational, as they tend to be in cultures like India and in South Asia, that, the rate of transmission from young people to older people might be higher. So it's kind of like, I guess it
Yeah,
depends.
I mean, and young people still contracted it, and every day there are young people who still get the disease. Some have fatal reactions to the virus, and other people might not even know that they have the virus. So it kind of has, it has 2 sides to the story with that.
Yeah, again, because of the low testing rates, right? So
Yeah.
let's turn to environment and climate concerns. So, there's a lot being made of the fact that flamingos are coming into Mumbai, and you can see the Himalayas from Punjab now where you couldn't see them before. And I know these places are pretty far away from where you are, but, is that real? Is that, I mean, because there was some talk about, Venice and, dolphins playing in the canals and stuff, which ended up being, a little bit of a bogus thing. But so are these things, true in India? Do you feel like the air is better? Do people feel like generally, the pollution is somewhat diminished since the lockdowns happened and that the air is cleaner? I mean, obviously, because those are real concerns in countries with such high density populations in terms of smog and pollution. And, some of the big cities in India have the highest smog and pollution indicators in the world, right? So how are people feeling? Is there really any truth to that?
Yes, and so if you just, in terms of just going outside, okay, you're limited to kind of your house or maybe your front yard or your backyard. I mean, it's difficult to say, but from what I've seen in terms of my friends who are in different parts of the country and I have a few friends based in Mumbai and Delhi, and just going through their, they posted pictures. I've seen several pictures. So just going by the pictures, also it's even in the night. So in cities like Mumbai and Delhi, you can't even see the stars typically because there's industrial manufacturing going on and there's a lot of smog. So people are able to see the stars when before you couldn't see anything. And the air quality also, the air quality is definitely improved also in Delhi, especially. They have a huge air pollution problem. And again, it has gotten better, but I think it's made probably a very small dent in the grand scheme of things, right? So once you start having industries down the line opening up again, air quality again is going to go back to square one because again, a lot of these metropolitan cities are surrounded by uh, industries, right? So they have factories for textiles, factories for uh, the auto industry. So all of these things play a huge factor in terms of the air quality as well.
Yeah, the bounce back might be even worse. I mean, because they're saying a lot of uh, suppliers or customers in the West might look away from China and look now more to India and Africa as suppliers for various industries. So, that might mean that there might be a boomerang effect and things get even worse when everything starts gearing up again. So that's an important consideration. So while we're talking about that, so what are the economic effects that you're seeing in your industry, other industries? What are you seeing right now? What's happening? What are the projections in terms of what might happen with the economy?
Right. So in terms of, let's start with the tourism industry. You asked me a while back if once the virus hit, was it our peak season or not? I don't think I answered that. So our peak season is usually from December to March, to the tail end of March to about April. So again, this happened uh, right bang in terms of lockdown, right bang in the middle of March approximately. Give or take a few days. But in terms of how this affected the tourism industry, right from the beginning of March. So if you looked at the month of March to the month of February, the business done is you can't even compare it. And if you look at March and January or March and December, again, it's a whole different story. So March has been, I think, quite horrible for everybody in the tourism industry. And nobody can really operate in this kind of environment, and I don't think anyone would want to, right? So you're putting in the risk of your team firstly, right? And then also your guests. You can't really guarantee that your guests are going to be safe, and health is the most important thing at this point. So I think more people, uh, especially in the tourism industry, have a long-sighted approach. So I think yes, slowly, maybe. Right now, we've also opened up restaurants, so restaurants can do takeouts, but nobody can go dining in restaurants. So I think it'll be a slow, gradual opening of the tourism industry, and it's going to take anywhere from 6 months, I think, just for even things to be remotely okay in terms of people traveling. And in the wider scale of things, if you look at real estate, if you look at manufacturing, if you look at textiles, if you look at the auto industry, all of these industries in February have done essentially no business, right? I was reading an article today about Maruti Suzuki. That's one of the biggest automakers in India, and they've sold zero in the
Wow.
month of April, which makes sense. Everybody's priority is food and shelter, right? At this point, nobody's thinking about traveling. Nobody's thinking about buying a car. Nobody's thinking about spending on these luxuries, right? So I think from A to Z, all these industries have a long recovery road ahead. And in terms of stimulus packages, the government has come out in the beginning, towards the end of March, with a stimulus package for the poor people. And kind of now with the business side of it, we're still waiting on a package for the economy, and nobody really knows what or when that's going to happen, which is kind of scary because um, again, we have a huge population, right? So it's a lot of jobs. If there's not a proactive approach to the economy, once things are okay, right? How do people, after things are okay, how do people go to work? How do people make a living? How do people support their families, right? And again, this is faced in all the countries, but again, in India, we have such a divide of social groups that from the working class people to the middle class people, right? So everybody's affected by this, and I think for all of these industries that I mentioned, it's definitely a couple months out when I think it's going to be a slow, gradual opening up, maybe 10%, 20%. And the government's also said that they're going to open up things slowly. And another industry that I forgot to mention, the airline industry also is in, that's again a part of the tourism industry. That's also, yeah, they're not flying. All domestic and international flights grounded. So again, how do they survive, right? So again, in the long term, the companies and the government really need to have some dialogue on what can be done, right? So in terms of stimulus package for the economy, we're still waiting on that, and industries from A to Z are definitely still in the initial steps of even thinking about starting up again.
What was the economy like in India before this happened? Was it considered to be a robust economy and growing, or was it stagnating? Was it
Yeah, so
recession?
no, the GDP was about forecasted around 5% for the upcoming year. So we were still growing. I think the last time the country was in a recession was a long time ago. So from 2000 onwards, we haven't been in a recession. I think the early 90s is when the last recession was. So again, it was doing okay. It was not, usually we're in 8 to 10% of GDP growth, and the current year was a bit low compared to the previous forecasts or the ambitions of the government. But yeah, still in positive territory, and I think things were still moving along, right? So it was not really at a standstill. Now what we have is everything is at a standstill, right? Much like everywhere else, everything is at a standstill. So again, once things do open up, it's difficult to see that we still see a significant GDP growth of even 5%.
What was the reason for such a soft forecast in terms of only 5% versus 8 to 10% or in past? Was there a reason why they're saying that? Was it because of economic situations, global situations, internal situations?
It's an economic situation. So in terms of private investment, if you looked at the economy, say 5 years ago, private investment was at a lower level, a significant lower level than 5 years ago. Even if you looked at foreign investment, a lot of foreign investment has been pulled out. So all these factors play a role in terms of building up the growth of the economy, and also the government policy. The government's been really focused on reducing their deficit and closing that deficit. So even the government spending has come down in that sense. Whereas in our previous regimes, the governments were more liberal on spending. So that also has a factor. So the private investment, the foreign investment, and the government spending.
Yeah, I mean, government spending always makes up a significant portion of GDP as well, so that's understandable. Do you think that the foreign investment being a bit softer is due to, I mean, we see a lot of media coverage in the West here about, the religious strife in India between Muslims and Hindus, and, the nationalistic party policies. Is that still going on? I know Kerala is pretty diverse too. I mean, I know that half of the population is Hindu, but there's also considerable Muslim and Christian populations as well. Have you seen, now that we're all kind of together and under all dealing with the same thing, has that abated a bit, or is it still happening? And I know a lot of it isn't in your region. It's more in the big cities and in the north, in the Kashmiri region and areas like that. But what is the overall feeling? Was the lack of foreign investment because of these kinds of things, now has it sort of abated because people have more pressing concerns?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. So I think that's something that religious tension's always been something that's countries had to deal with and manage to a certain extent, because when something like that happens, it kind of derails the bigger picture, right? So even I would say in the beginning of this the coronavirus issue, you did see a bit of those tensions kind of crop up again. But even now, the Delhi chief minister, so he's also come out, and said, in this kind of situation, there's no Hindu or Muslim. Everybody's a human being, right? So I think now that everybody's dealing with this crisis, people are more looking in terms of human life versus religion, and it's been a slow, gradual movement to that. In the beginning, there's definitely some tensions there, and in the economy side of it, before the coronavirus issues, also that I think that was less of a factor in terms of foreign direct investment, and a lot of the factors also that you look at is I think people being more conservative with their own investment. So even if the surrounding economies, the international economies, if you look at it, a lot of them are contracting, right? Mm-hmm. So before coronavirus, a lot of the economies are not doing as well. So if the foreign economies are not doing well, why would they put their money in other economies? So they kind of are looking for these safe havens. So I think the foreign investments were more conservative, even though India is in the positive GDP growth level before the virus happened. I think just because of influences even in the global economy, people are more conservative in terms of taking risky investments. And in terms of parking your money, I think people will be more comfortable in a GDP plus country. But in this kind of situation, again, I think everyone is going to be extremely conservative and kind of look at their own country first, and then think about foreign investment for import-export operations once things start to clear up, right?
Those are very, very important insights. So it's been great chatting with you, Pathros, and thank you so much. I think you've definitely brought a lot of enlightenment to my learning in terms of what's happening in South Asia. I'll let you have some last words in terms of what do you think, what would you like to see happen, as the country and the world opens up again. Obviously we want to see the transmission and the death rates continue to go down. But what would you like to see in terms of cultural changes, economic changes, especially in where you are? What are your hopes and expectations?
Yeah, from the cultural side, I think we're definitely working. I think everybody's been forced and put in a position where you have to be able to work with each other in this kind of environment. And I hope that this same kind of teamwork and collaboration can move forward, right? So I hope it doesn't take another pandemic for people to come together and work together. And I think in tough situations, a lot of people are putting their differences aside and coming together. So I hope to see that going forward. It'll be very difficult, but I hope to see that. And in terms of the economy, I hope for, I think, on a global level, I think the governments definitely have to take a more proactive approach in terms of just protecting first the citizens, and then the industries, and then the overall policies, right? So hopefully we can. It's going to be tough, but hopefully we see some slow movements in terms of things opening up and people being able to go back to work. I think that's the most important thing, right? So if the governments are able to help out, and once people are able to go back and actually take part in their day-to-day jobs and routines, then we can finally say, okay, things are normal. I think until that point where people are able to go into their daily routines and their jobs, there's still a lot for us to do.
Do you think that, or what is the general opinion of citizens of how government and industry have handled the coronavirus? Has there been, a good system of stimulus and welfare for citizens and households from both government and industry? Industry meaning, in terms of paid leave and these kinds, and paid furloughs and these kinds of things, or is it overall everybody has to take care of themselves, and the opinion is that the government, and give me some insight into regional governments as well, not just the federal government, but what are the feelings overall?
Yeah, so there are, in terms of the private side of it, people are helping out as much as they can. And again, I think there are certain limits for everybody, right? So I think everybody is trying to take a human approach to this, right? Helping as much as they can. And you see a lot of the companies helping as much as they can. And I think it's a case-to-case basis also, right? And the government also, for mainly the poor, right? So they have announced that stimulus that I mentioned, and they've done a combination of a direct transfer, a cash transfer. It amounts to, it varies. So different classes of the working or the poor people receive a certain amount, and they also receive some food. So food grains like rice, wheat, some pulses like dal, and just staples so they can manage their households. Again, this was done about a month ago, and the food benefit's still going on, but the cash transfer is just a one-time occurrence, right? So I think for a lot of the people, the government has announced a huge cash transfer, but in the grand scale of things, that amount is quite small for each person. So I think a lot of the poor people would have already gone through that amount and kind of are struggling to see where that would come from. A lot of people who are unable to work, right, or who are not working before. So I think those people are in even more of a big dilemma, right? So what do they do? And the private side of it, people are helping out while they can, and I think it's a different approach to the West, where people are kind of just sacking everybody. I think companies are kind of being asked by the governments also to kind of help out as much as they can. And if you also just see the news, and you kind of see both sides to the story. But again, some are doing good things, and others are kind of taking the corporate approach.
So that's really interesting. So that the government, put its attention in terms of stimulus towards the, working poor, the poverty-stricken, the unemployed first, and taking care of them. I mean, obviously, with 1.4 billion people, it's a massive undertaking, no matter which sector you look at. But that's interesting because in Canada and the U.S., it's been more of a overall approach. Everybody who's eligible receives the same amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting that the government decided that they would focus on the more vulnerable population. But then what about middle class? Has there been any assistance for the middle class at all?
No, not yet. And so mainly you focus on the poor right now, and I think I would expect another stimulus for um, the people below the poverty line. I'm pretty confident that there will be another stimulus for them. The middle class again have kind of caught in the middle of this, where they probably don't receive as much attention from the government, and in terms of job stability also, that's kind of up in the air right now also.
So, but the overall perception of industry, because I mean, it's all over the place here, and in the West, in terms of, billionaires are getting, richer, off of this pandemic, and taking advantage of stock market fluctuations, and there's also been many cases of a stimulus that was intended for small business. Large multi-billion-dollar corporations have applied for and gotten it, and there's all kinds of back and forth in terms of industry, showing some heart and helping their workers, and then there's been many cases of the opposite. What is the overall, because culturally, India is, and Asia, all of Asia is very different from the West in terms of the viewpoint and how to take care of the more vulnerable, and your responsibilities in terms of taking care of people that work for you, etc. Those are very highly crucial cultural indicators, right? I mean, you can be judged on how you take care of the more vulnerable. You're judged to how you take care of your workers, not just by citizens, but by your faith as well. So do you think that plays a part in terms of the more maybe humanitarian approach that industry is taking, or people are feeling that the industry is taking?
Yeah, that definitely plays a part. And I think the place of business and the kind of atmosphere on the business, and whether the business is what the condition of the business was before the epidemic also. So if it was a healthy company where making profits and such, those companies are in a much better position to help out, right? So, and a lot of them have helped out, and there have been a few media groups who are kind of gone the opposite route and kind of sacked a lot of the people. So I think a lot of companies also trying to not sack anyone, but kind of just keep them on board and see how things go, and kind of make sure they have a job when they come back. So you kind of see both sides to that. And again, definitely there's still people who, as I mentioned, a few companies who have been making huge profits. Kind of a few media companies there cutting people, and they have a significant cash reserve also, right? So you do still have those companies that are kind of securing their profits, and the flip side also is that to that.
Yeah, I mean, I always found that really interesting. When I lived and worked in Pakistan for almost 2 years, it's very different in terms of how you see vulnerable populations. You can't avoid it. You know what I mean? There's no really living in a bubble, because as soon as you leave your home, you can see it in your home if you have servants, in terms of seeing where they come from and their lifestyles and the challenges that they have. But as soon as you leave your house, you see it everywhere. Abject poverty is everywhere. So I think it has a significant impact on how you view the world. Also, too, I always say to people, like, in the West, we have homelessness and poverty, and we have our own challenges. But when you go to countries like India and Pakistan, you see a vulnerable population that there is nothing that they can do. If the more advantaged people don't help them, there's nothing they can do, right? It's not a simple matter of, why don't you just get yourself educated or reskilled, or all of the things that we say that would help our vulnerable populations in the West. Other than the fact that there's other contributing factors like mental illness and addiction and things like that. But in India and Pakistan, it's just like, if you're born into poverty, that's it. I mean, there's very little that you can do to lift yourself out of that if you don't have outside help.
Yeah, that plays a huge part in the grand scheme of things, right? So and a lot of the people that would say that, oh, why don't you go and get an education? So they might not be in a position to afford that. They might not be in a position to appreciate that or even go ahead with that, right? So they might be living a life where going to a traditional classroom or getting an education might be beyond their comprehension or it might be very difficult for them to adapt, right? So maybe a person who's living in a village is asked to go to the bigger city and maybe attend college or something. So there are limitations for people, right? To have access to go from a village to maybe the city to attend some institution or something. So they have these limitations, but also they're restricted by um, societal commitments also. So they might have family at home that say, oh, please don't go to the city, stay here, stay in the village, look after us, right? So you have these factors also that kind of hold people back, and that plays a huge part as well, right? So you have people who are not as uh, well educated, but again, they haven't been able to do that because of their backgrounds, because of their commitments, or because of the contributing factors, external factors, all of the times that kind of come with the social demographics of a country like India.
Yeah, no, I don't think a lot of people realize that, like that generational household also comes with different responsibilities as well, right? Oftentimes one person is the sole earner for the whole household, right? And if that person is, a young person, then, they're not able to just, quit their job and go to work. Then also the levels of education are so vast, right? Like what a poor person can afford in terms of the quality of education and what a person of means can afford. I know in Pakistan, the people of means, they all had Western educations, right? They all went abroad to get educated. And, the people who didn't have means, you got to select from, very poor quality colleges and universities, versus, if you have means, you can go to the higher quality ones. So that also changes how your future opportunities are, your quality of education. Even like I saw like such a difference in terms of, English speaking and writing skills in terms of, what school the person went to, right? And when you have that kind of discrepancy, I guess, households have to make that decision is what are you going to gain from going to and getting an education if the education itself is so poor that it's not going to really help you achieve anything more than what you were born into, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then another important factor about the social dynamics and families is a lot of the migrant workers that we have in different states in India who come from different parts of the country. A lot of them come from big families and they're the only ones working and they're sending money back home. So if they stop working, there's not going to be any food at home. So for them to pursue different lifestyles or different education means it's very tough because they're not only going to suffer, but their family of 5, family of 6, or family of 7 or more are also going to be in a difficult position.
Do you think that things will change in terms of workers' rights and, the servant class having more rights? I mean, a lot of instances, the servant class is basically it's indentured servitude, right? In terms of how um, they're treated. They'll work for generations for the same family in the same households because they're indebted to those families. Has this pandemic brought forth any questions in terms of taking care of the working class, the working poor, taking care of the servant class, workers' rights? Are there any of those kinds of conversations happening? Because there's some feelings that, when things return back to normal, we can choose to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting question because here in Kerala, we have a significant migrant worker population, and a significant amount of them have been stuck here. and a few of them might have some work, but a majority of them are not working. And for them, the approach that our state government has been taking now, that they kind of calling them guest workers versus migrant workers. So kind of removing that negative word from of migrant to guest worker, so making them feel more welcome and providing food and shelter for them also. So you have this aspect to it. So I think governments, local governments, state governments, definitely more forced and more conscious about people, especially people who are coming from outside of their own states, because again, using the word guest means totally different from using the word migrant, right?
I love that. I love that. Maybe there is, Pathros, a little silver lining in all of this. If you're telling me that, people are getting along better because they realize there's more important things than just religious difference to worry about when you have food and shelter concerns, and we're all getting along in terms of on a human level. And language matters, my friend. And just that simple change from migrant to guest, I think, speaks volumes in how you treat a person. I love that. So so let's hope that maybe the whole, everybody keeps talking about a better world after all of this. I'm a bit skeptical because I feel like when things open up again, we're all going to be so worried about getting back to our previous lives and fending for ourselves and recovering our businesses and occupations and all that kind of stuff, that things are going to go back to how they were before. But I am hopeful that the longer this goes on, that we all realize that there are certain ways that we are living our lives and treating others, that it doesn't take a lot for us to be able to change that. And it's just a simple attitude of realizing that everything you do, everything you consume, everything you take and give to people affects more than just that one person. It affects how we treat each other overall.
Yeah, and that's the question, right? So how do we treat each other? How do we go forward once this is over? That's the big question. And I think it's going to be very difficult for things to be the same way going forward. Also, it's at this point, I think people are kind of reduced to basic necessities, right? So once things are slowly back to normal, again, people are not looking for their basic needs anymore. People are looking for other things, right? So luxuries that they're kind of pursuing before. So that kind of shift in dynamics is definitely going to change perspectives. And again, now focusing on health and shelter and food versus pursuing those luxuries, definitely it's going to be tough for everyone to, I think, change 100%.
Well, it goes back to those theories on growth of civilization, right? So when we were in villages, we took better care of each other because we knew each other, right? And then when we grew to towns, then the space between me and the person next door becomes wider, and I don't know them, so I have a less concern for their well-being. And then cities, even more, we're even further removed from each other and more strangers. So I think things like this pandemic have brought back that, again, that almost village mentality of like taking care of yourself and your neighbors and realizing how your actions can affect other people. Just that simple change, I think, again, like that awakening, that realizing that everything I do, from washing my hands and wearing a face mask, can help others, or I can neglect to do that and harm others. I think that simple shift in mentality hopefully carries us through other things that we do as well. It's been a pleasure, Pathros, my friend. I always enjoy talking to you. I miss it dearly, and hopefully we can stay in touch. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and bringing all the insights that you brought in. I think this is going to be really helpful to people to actually hear from someone who's living it on the ground in India.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and we'll definitely catch up soon when I'm around. I think it'll be a few months, but
All right.
I,
All right, my friend. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. Give my regards to your family as well. I'd love to meet them someday.